Okay, cool. So, Dogysamich and I saw it from the perspective of casters, and we were able to kind of. I mean, I was following more of just trying to the play by play and the hype and the production and the camera and the everything, and I keep up with a lot of the specific moments of the game, but sometimes casting, it's easy to lose perspectives of longer time periods. So I guess I would like to start with Minu, since you were in there as a secondary spectator for this chat. Give us a little bit of your thoughts on how this game kind of started out and what ultimately was like the drivers of their success. And I guess let's start from the draft as a whole.
So the first thing I noticed about the draft, and the only thing I really put down as notes, was the fact that Anti-Mage was banned first. I think right now he's largely considered a situational pick, and even still, he has a very low win rate in public games and a practically non-existent win rate in professional games. That was my first concern with the draft. My second concern with the game overall was the aggro tri lane. As everybody probably knows, aggro tri lanes are designed to generate kills on the lane, particularly against the aerial carry. And when I looked throughout the laning phase, they had missed kills on the Juggernaut at least twice that I can recall. And that's where I feel like the game started falling apart. Was they had this aggro tri lane where three people were soaking up XP on the lane, and they couldn't exactly, roam very well. Um, However, that was my major notes from the game.
Okay. So your mic is a little muffled. I don't know if that's like how it's like presented or what, but I'm able to understand what you're saying. It's just, not good clarity. So, Samich, do you have any comments that or criticisms that you may have on the draft, and then we'll go into the coaches' kind of thoughts on it if they had any sort of influence in on it.
Um, for the draft, my ideas were pretty much the same. The only question I really had is since they planned on having an aggro lane like we discussed and like Minu even pointed out, I wonder why the idea was to have Warlock and Marana as the support and excuse me, not something to set up the Marana. Because I mean, sure you could use Chaos Knight, I guess, but it's not like the kind of long range setup that you really want to have if you wanted a Marana. That's where I think a lot of the questionability really came in. Other than that, um, I I don't think there's anything that stood out more than the norm of what happens.
Okay, so all right, let's get our coaches chatting about this a little bit then. So Lobsta, general knowledge. The floor is yours, guys. If one of you wants to start it off, or maybe have a dialogue back and forth on it.
Are we still talking draft?
Yeah, yeah. Draft. If did you guys have any sort of input or influence on the drafting?
I pushed the idea of the aggro tri lane once we found out that our off laners hero pool is a little limited and it was going to be a tough matchup against Ogre Disruptor. I figured any off lane solo would get just torn apart by that, so we kind of went for just switched up at the last second. So yeah, the Warlock and Mirana wasn't ideal for that, but I figured it was better than the alternative of feeding the off lane over and over.
So, what were some of those heroes that he could have wanted for the off lane that you weren't able to get?
We were thinking Timber or Slardar initially, but they would just with the glimpse and the stun from Ogre, those things would have not survived, and they wouldn't have been able to farm.
Sure.
And Sand King does pretty well against other melee matchups, so I figured that for a one-on-one was going to be a good matchup for the lane. I think there's a bit of miscommunication. The Sand King missed a wave or two of XP, which probably hurt a bit in the XP game.
For the real early game, at least, because he was doing like creep blocking in the mid lane, and then he slowly walked to the bottom, I believe, after that.
Yeah. Well, so then there's another problem where I was using team all chat or team chat to tell the players to get a smoke and go gank at the 0 minute rune.
I did not
And
tell
found
him.
out. Okay, I wasn't
I did
sure if
not
that
tell
was
my
gonna
team.
work out or not. And so I told them like, oh well, shit. The coach just read that. Let's abort. And then there was miscommunication.
I have integrity. I did not tell
So-
him.
Wait, what?
I could see him typing in chat to his team, only the coach. So he like immediately said like, "You guys buy wards and you guys buy smoke and smoke top." And I was like, "Oh, I can read that." And I told
So
him. And then
the coaching
I didn't tell
is
my team.
bugged?
Yeah. So
I didn't tell my team. But
Ugh.
Yeah, so I appreciate that part, but yeah, there was this miscommunication at that point where we
I
weren't
could
sure
see how
what
it
they were
disrupted
gonna
you
do.
guys once you figured out. I knew.
So you guys could literally just like talk back and forth to each other the whole game if you wanted,
Not in void. Oh yeah, we could through.
through
Yeah.
just like general message. That's
We found an option that you could actually mute the other coach. I don't understand why that's not default. But
that's I
Yeah,
mean,
so we figured
Huh.
out that little bit.
anyways,
But yeah, back to the draft.
okay.
The anti-mage ban, I agree, was a little preemptive.
Uh-huh.
that was very. Yeah. Not a good first phase ban.
Yeah, maybe someone has their own like vendetta against anti-mage specifically.
I think
Um,
is yeah, just don't want to deal with anti-mage right now.
yeah, you
but
never know.
There could have been other bans to get rid of that are more like tier 1 right now.
Okay, so let's get into like the early to mid game phase, and I mean, let's pan. I mean, I can pan back on this graph real quick, and we know that the way that it was going at the start, it was a lot of back and forth for the fights, and it was pretty even. What do you think some of the defining moments were for the Dire that made it difficult for the Radiant to come back? Do you think it was any specific fight that you can take or a specific item that they acquired that allowed them to start fighting behind it?
I think
I
a lot
think
of
there
it.
were
I-
two fights in that top lane that Radiant missed out like 3 kills at once. Like 3 different heroes got down to like 10 to 20%, and it was just kind of everyone on Dire just barely lived, and that allowed them to, not feed the aggro tri lane.
Sure.
Radiant fell into this hole where they just kept going top, and they constantly had like 3 heroes top.
I agree.
And you can see where the Dire at that point, they pretty much just switched one of their cores to pretty much just go farm the rest of the map and get free farm. There, that was the OB, the Jug.
Well, yeah, Juggernaut was just going anywhere on the map, and then there was a long period where Juggernaut was just ignored, and then eventually,
Yes.
I mean, we know the point where he was pressuring the tier 3 mid, and then Mirana rotated for it, and then able to get a solo kill on her, then take the tower, then both the racks, and then there was the team fight bottom as well, and of course that was like, one of the ultimate end pieces that led to the, the nail in the coffin, but I'm just talking like in terms of just like itemization. Was there something that there was a specific person on the Radiant or the Dire picking up that allowed them to really group up and make movements as a team? Because both of these teams are very team fight centric. I don't think we really saw anything to that sort of direct, situation, where there's a key item that's picked up on a player, and then there's objectives that are able to be taken, or team fights that are able to be instigated, or things like that.
I think one of the earliest things I noticed was that the Sand King went for 4-staff first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was
Especially when he's given such a free lane like that against a melee. He wasn't doing great. He should have definitely done much better in that lane as well. Or they did all right in the beginning. It's
yeah.
kinda easy to
He
trade.
got the 4-staff at 1645. It
Yeah.
says.
In a lane against a solo Clockwork, there was definitely. I wasn't watching that lane that much. I was more focused on the tri lanes going on. But there's definitely more he could have done to win that lane. At least a little bit more, and he could have gotten like a 12-minute blink or even like 9-minute, depending on what he's doing. And then going for that force with his team, like if he had gone that force and actually went around the map with smokes and was like, all right, Marn, I'm gonna go on someone, they easily get a burrow strike, blink burrow strike into another arrow, which would be like 4 seconds long. Just
Well,
much better initiation.
you know, all things considered, the only reason why I think we saw that disparity is because of just, you know, the person to person matchup in the lane, because it essentially came down to a 1v1 for a good chunk of the game. And, you know, that's where we're seeing just a novice player versus someone who's, you know, far more experienced. And
Yeah, the Clockwork was the 3K player, right?
correct. And not to like point things out directly, but if we're just looking at straight numbers, I believe the Sand King was actually the lowest skill player on the team, numerically speaking. However, we saw him shine through as a big playmaker across the game. So it wouldn't be something that you would have been able to necessarily reflect on him specifically if you were to have just looked at the game as a whole.
He kept his farm up pretty well.
Yeah, I agree. Losing a couple of waves and then getting a level or two down to a Clockwork, and then that Clockwork bought dust of his own and came down and killed the Sand King at like level 7, I think, and getting a solo kill at that point, I think really swung the rest of the lane.
So it was actually the lowest MMR player on the Radiant against the highest MMR player on the Dire, and I think he stood his own very well in the lane with those sort of considerations. Itemization wise, I do agree that a blink would have been better to get sooner, and I think if you recall the fight that was up in the top by the tier 2, where he landed that epicenter on 2, it was a little bit strange for how the fight actually broke out, because he had a force staff that went like a little sideways, but he was still able to do a burrow strike into the middle of the fight, so it was fine eventually. But
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
yeah, it's just like, you know, things like that make it a little bit difficult in fights, and there's a ton of value to getting a force staff as your first type of movement item if you're going up against a Clockwork. But I feel like you should be able to get a blink dagger before the Clockwork would be able to get a blade mail in a lot of times.
Yep.
And the Clockwork was doing a good job at pressuring him away from creeps. And that's not something that you want to do when you're going against a Clockwork. You want to be surrounded by as many of your friends as possible, because those are other targets that could get hit by battery assault. So you need to think of Clockwork in a similar fashion to going against a Juggernaut with an Omni Slash ultimate, where if you are by yourself against a Juggernaut, if he omnis you, you're going to get hit by all of it. It's the same sort of premise with Clockwork and Battery Assault, where if you are in a solo situation, level 2 Battery Assault does like close to 900 magic damage if every single thing hits from Battery Assault level 2. It's like 900 damage or something close to that before reductions. So it's absolutely ridiculous, the sort of damage output that you can have early game on that character. And that's something that you just don't have unless it's from experience, because you got to be able to kind of recognize the sort of damage output that would be coming from the enemy.
And if I could just comment also, I
Yeah,
think,
go for it.
for the Sand King skill build, when he's 1v1 against a melee hero like that, he went 2 levels in Burrow Strike and 1 in Caustic at level 3. And then he also skilled Sandstorm at 4, and I think if he had just gone 1-0-2, putting 2 points in Caustic at level 3, and gets the melee Clockwork, who's only level 3, you put so much more damage on him, and like Clockwork just can't be near that creep wave.
I agree.
Just loses half his health.
Caustic is
And then
really
in addition
strong.
to that, if at 4 he was like 2-0-2, anytime Clockwork cogses him, you can just Burrow Strike out. I mean, it would have put a more survive building in lane, as well as doing a lot more damage to him.
Yeah, I agree.
So I guess when we were getting closer to like the mid-game phase of the game, the Radiant were getting to a point where they were almost able to kind of bring it back to an equal net worth. And I forget what the team fight was that kind of made it all those hopes and dreams go away, but it was around 30 minutes that, you know, things were looking pretty up for the Radiant. Let me.
They were looking strong. And
Yeah.
It was at 30 minutes, and it was at bot lane when Jug was solo pushing mid. Is that the one you're thinking of, or before that?
I guess it. I think it was a little bit before that. Like the thing that happened before that fight.
It's at. Oh, okay.
What the fuck?
Was it?
About 30 minutes.
Was it in the Radiant Jungle? Maybe. There was a couple fights that happened there.
Trying to see here. Okay, so Mirana got a big level up. Warlock 2, getting closer to 30 minutes, but then, I mean, at like the 30-minute mark, if you're looking at like player levels, for instance, as a unit of measurement, you can see, you know, all the dire characters, you know, shooting up quite a bit here.
Yeah.
So from the Radiant, I would have liked to see something in the direction of like a pipe or some sort of team item that would help everyone rather than putting focus on just like an individual player. Do you think that should have been something the Sand King considered rather than like the Aether Lens or even earlier than that?
Yeah, pipe
possibly.
might have helped. I mean, I think
Not ideal.
at that point you're playing to not lose as opposed to playing to win, though.
I think they needed more Force Staffs. I mean, they were building one on Warlock, but he was just so underfarmed.
Yeah.
How
The
lane
Warlock
ended up and all
was
that.
like playing position 6. Like every time he exposed a sentry ward or ward, he'd give the kill to someone else. So his farm was definitely hurting, I think.
Yeah, and Warlock and Disruptor were having a lot of sentry fight-offs where they were using sentries to counter sentries and then sentries to counter sentries. Sentries to counter sentries and then sentries to counter sentries, so it was sentries to only to counter sentries. So they didn't necessarily really matter unless they were planning on looking to drop another observer there anyway.
Right.
Which is unideal. But yeah.
Well, I mean, when you have the Mirana ult to worry about, you may want to clear out their sentries.
It was early into the. It was early on though.
But
It was,
yeah, I know
it was
what
definitely
you're talking
early.
about. They dropped like 3 or 4 in that top lane.
Yeah, because there was originally some good counter warding coming out from the Dire, and then the Radiant countered the Dire's counter, and then the Dire countered the Radiant's counter of the Dire's counter. And I don't know if the Radiant did it again after that, but I wouldn't have been surprised because there was a lot of sentries purchased that game and observers, but well, Minu, Dogysamich, do you guys have any comments on just map vision as a whole for these guys? I know you haven't really, you know, you've just, I mean, there's a lot of chat in here, but you guys feel free to, you know, chime in with commentary on, you know, things that are being discussed.
I mean, I know I could. There just hasn't been anything I've wanted to say.
Okay,
Vision,
fair enough.
Yeah, aside from what you just said, which was like the highlight of Vision, there really wasn't a whole lot on the Radiant side. And the bit that did go up was the typical like defensive warding that didn't really amount to anything. Like, for example, the one time they smoked and went across the river and found the Disruptor, they did that blind. And it's generally just never a good idea to smoke blind. But at the same time, when they went across the river, I don't remember them warding as well. So they were just shooting in the dark and hoping they could find something. And it just so happened they found the least valuable member on the team.
Minu, any comments?
That was pretty much the exact same thing I was going to say.
Okay.
It's like it all. My bad. It all stems back from like what I was saying in the cast, which was like the hardest thing that happens in scenarios like this and games like this is just like getting a goal and working towards the goal. Because if they were working towards the goal, even if they were failing towards the goal, they would have the vision that they would want to like narrow down the options of where people could be. But since the entire game was kind of like, well, we're starting up here in this trial lane, it's not working. What do we do? Let's kind of wander around and hit creeps. They never really like were able to focus on let's go here and try to take this part of the map away from them, or let's go here and try to hit a tower. So they never really got any wards up to set themselves up to do stuff like that. And honestly, the only reason that that one gank in particular worked out is because they had a Mirana to throw the Moonlight on top of the smoke. So I don't think there's really more you could say about it, honestly.
All right. Well, let's see if there is any commentary from the players of the game that they want us to expand upon. Anything that stood out during team fights. I think from Radiant perspective, I feel like Urbao was out of position a lot of times and standing far too forward for where his cores were when he was trying to back them up. That's something I feel like I saw consistently.
Are you like tailing it off looking for agreement or denial?
I mean, I'm presenting this as something that I would want anyone who is allowed to talk to chime in on.
Okay, I agree. And I agree with consideration that he had a Mirana. And so, again, like, I get the idea that he was going for it, especially since he had level 1 upheaval. He felt that he needed to be in a position to make sure that something could get hit by the upheaval or would have to touch the upheaval. I just wish that he would have swapped like positions with where the Mirana was most of the time, because usually, especially in the tri lane, the Mirana was like on the outside of where the Dire was going to be, meaning she's technically in the safer spot. But if she was on the inside where the Warlock was, the Mirana would have been fine or she would have been better off because she had a leap. Mm-hmm. And even though she didn't have it at level 1, because it's Mirana that wants to kill people, so she's going to have arrow. At level 2, that gives her some kind of an out to, you know, do things you do with an out, make space, buy time, initiate maybe. But yeah, having the Warlock consistently playing on the inside is another like gamble. It's like, are you going to be able to find well, at that point, the upheaval, which isn't really going to stop somebody from walking at you.
Sure.
Or are you going to find an arrow that's going to save the Warlock, or are they going to find him first and lock him down with a kinetic field?
Coaches, Minnow, anyone else have other things that they may want to bring up that stood out during any team fights?
One of the things I noticed, at least, is the fact that Juggernaut went for the Mjolnir first over Manta. I think that was actually probably one of the best choices that he made throughout the game, just due to the fact that the CK was there and he was tanky, and this can naturally burst down the illusions relatively quickly while keeping him safe.
So how was the communication for your teams, especially like, you know, voice chat versus just, you know, any sort of pinging or types of movement that they might want to be doing across the game? Because for me, I had it set up so that there were people who identified as shot callers on each team. How did that kind of end up panning out? I believe we had Ilyas, who would do some shot calling, and then I think both Chimad, or I don't know how you pronounce your in-game name. I know you're Gene Malone op spec, but I just kind of go by the in-game name. And then we have ATB as well, who also says that he shot calls. But coaches, how'd the communication go?
I think it went pretty well on our side. You know, there are players that were vocal and other players that weren't. But I think on 2 or 3 different occasions, there was really good response, TPing to a gank on mid and helping out the Kunkka, who was getting engaged on. So, like, from that standpoint, I think it was pretty solid. And then it was really hard to hear Kunkka, who was lagging. But other than that, I think between the tri lane and helping out the other lanes, it was pretty solid, given what they had to work with.
Okay. And Mr. Lobster?
Yeah, so they were doing a pretty good job when there would be calls for pushing or not. I think they did a pretty good job of saying, "All right, I'm on my way," or "I'm not there yet. Wait." They were doing pretty good at that. I think there were times where there could have been a little bit more discussion on, you know, if like we have ward vision and they were moving in. I think there definitely could have been, and they know like we see 2 heroes. I think there could have been some more prioritization on, all right, I'm going in on this hero, or during the middle of a team fight. I know there was one situation where people were calling for a glimpse on the SK, but then he glimpsed another hero, and it was just it was fine either way. They got both kills, but if the disruptor had first said, "All right, I'm glimpsing this one," even if it's a mistake, just say, "All right, I glimpsed this one." It helps the team coordinate better.
Okay, that definitely good points. Any other criticisms or, well, I mean, I don't like criticisms, but more of comments that could help improve anyone else in the game that you guys may have? You know, just as a whole, for any, it could be for a specific person or just, you know, how they coordinate or work with other people.
I think when you end up with like a less than ideal synergy between, you know, someone like CK and Marana, talking about the order that you're going to do your spells would help a lot. I think there was one time towards like the beginning of the game where CK stunned, Marana let go of the arrow, and then CK used the W to pull him in, and the arrow missed. I think if that arrow would have hit, it would have led to a definite kill and would have probably influenced the early game a lot more.
Apparently it was a first-time disruptor.
It was. Yes.
Why would you...
Wow.
I mean, that was like, did you guys not remember the big rant I had at the beginning about playing characters that you feel comfortable with? Because the way that you want to kind of approach it is a lot of these people are going to try hard you because they want to, you know, they want to flex
I did not know
the
that
style,
was
but,
a rule.
well, no, it wasn't necessarily a rule, but I mean, hey, if you were able to take him out of his comfort area and he feels like he did a good job.
He actually
then,
ended up doing really well late game or mid game and late game. He did really well with placing his ult on important heroes, and he consistently got 2+ person ults. But there were obviously some things which were funny. He skilled glimpse level 1. That was a big thing. That was pretty funny. Not ideal.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you're telling me that's the first time disruptor in this game,
that is pretty solid. Yeah.
Yeah, you could have convinced me otherwise. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and say he's gonna win TI or anything, but he made some moves.
Yeah, and it was kind of fun to watch it actually for being his first time, because there was definitely some mistakes that he made in the beginning, and he actively was correcting as like we went on, which is cool. Like one of the first, they kind of dove the tier 1, and as like many disruptors who have never played before, they just kind of use all their spells and they just glimpse one of the enemies back to safety.
Exactly.
Happened once, and there's something over
it did happen once.
Yeah, and did much better with it as it went on. So
cool.